The views and opinions expressed in our program are those of the speakers and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent. All rights reserved. Are you searching for that voice of reason in these troubled times? Do some things just not make sense? We are determined to help navigate through this unparalleled, extraordinary time in history with everyday people emphasizing open mindedness, free thinking, and a desire to be empowered at the grassroots level, working with what nature has given us and protecting that from those who are exploiting it. And welcome to our special edition series, SDGs and What You Need to Know. Together, we will be explaining and discussing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Our mission is to educate everyday citizens about SDGs, what they are, what they mean, how the laws and policies that are and have been passed can and will affect us, not only here in Canada, but around the world. Additionally, by learning and understanding these 17 goals, we can all become one step closer in helping to affect change in this world from a grassroots perspective. Let's get started with Sustainable Development Goal number 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Goal 16 is about promoting peaceful and inclusive societies, providing access to justice for all, and building effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. People everywhere should be free of fear from all forms of violence and feel safe as they go about their lives, whatever their ethnicity, faith, or sexual orientation. High levels of armed violence and insecurity have a destructive impact on a country's development. Sexual violence, crime, exploitation, and torture are prevalent where there is conflict or no rule of law. Governments, civil society, and communities need to work together to find lasting solutions to conflict and insecurity. Strengthening the rule of law and promoting human rights is key to this process, as is reducing the flow of illicit arms, combating corruption, and ensuring inclusive participation at all times. At this time, I'd like to turn the mic over to Mark for our discussion.
So I have to laugh because there's so much hypocrisy built into this goal. They don't want peace. In fact, they fill their coffers by creating war. And people that are connected to them, elites, multinationals, connected to these wars, always do very well. They don't want peace. The opposite of peace generates wealth for these people. They don't want to eliminate corruption. In fact, if anybody's been paying attention over the last number of years, corruption has gone way up around the world, not just in Canada. If you just think back to the WE scandal, think back to SNC Lavalin, the Ukraine war, for example, is contrived, orchestrated, manipulated, manufactured for the consequences that come from this. It was very much an avoidable war. Dating back to 1992, when the agreement was, when the Soviet Union fell, that NATO would not move 1 inch closer to Russia. They broke that agreement 14 times. We've talked about this already in a previous goal, but it's important to talk about it here because they talk about peace. They don't want peace. They're using the Ukraine as a funding mechanism. They're funneling billions from countries around the world, mostly first world countries, into the Ukraine and then out of the Ukraine, which is why Zelensky continues to ask for billions of dollars from all of these nations, because it funnels in and it goes out just as quickly. The corruption, because of this hyper centralization, anytime we've ever seen in history hyper centralization of governance and control, we see corruption. It's just the natural flow to things when there's too much power, centralized, and the corruption is rampant around the world. And yes, they do want strong institutions. They want institutions that are going to ignore human rights. They want institutions. They want policing. They want corrupt judges. They want people to ignore, for example, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms like we have in Canada, or at least manipulate what we have in place that Papa Trudeau put in place for a particular reason. Section 1 is a good example. Section 1 allows the government to limit rights, although in that these governments must um, clearly um, demonstrate and justify why they're limiting the rights. And as we saw through COVID, not one of these provincial governments that instituted these restrictions and mandates where we couldn't gather outside with more than 10 people, we couldn't associate with who we wanted to associate, we didn't have free speech, we didn't have all of these rights and freedoms. In fact, when we when we expressed those rights and freedoms, they ticketed us. And but none of these governments across the board ever demonstrably justified the mandates or restrictions. There's been no evidence brought forward why we couldn't gather outside with more than 10 people. They haven't justified that. They haven't demonstrably justified this in a democratic society, as is, you know, listed in section 1. And so they're obviously, because and judges are ruling on this, judges are ruling against us, even though it's very clear, even though the provincial government hasn't demonstrably justified any of it. They haven't brought forward any evidence, and the judges are telling them they don't have to. So, you know, that's what they mean by strong institutions. They want their police forces to fall in line, to listen to what the government tells them under tyranny. They want the judges to be just as corrupt as the police. And that's exactly what strong institutions means. So they can manipulate the system, so they can control the masses and get the masses to do exactly what it is they need them to do when meeting these all of these goals and all of these targets and indicators. So um, yeah, all of it is very concerning, and we haven't even begun. Excuse me, we haven't even begun to talk about, once they institute digital ID and digital currency, and how they're going to control all of us, and you know the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. What's that? It's we're we're quickly moving into tyranny and living under a tyrannical government around the world, and this is what this is all about. So these nation states, the UN, the people at the UN World Economic Forum, they require nation states to implement all of this so they can more easily, when they're creating these policies and they send them over to these national governments, the national governments can more easily implement all of these goals and achieve all of these goals, targets, and indicators. So, yeah, I mean, this is what they want, and they're telling us that's what they want. But to suggest that they want peace and that they want to eradicate corruption is a farce, and it makes me laugh because it's funny.
Yeah, it is really funny, Mark. Like, as Kelsey was reading there, it says that, they don't want um, the exploitation and torture, which is kind of, for our listeners that obviously lived through COVID the last 2-3 years. It's approaching third years, I guess, but it's like it is no um, intimidation or coercing a person or a third person under 269.1. which is the torture actual law of torture. It basically says that coercion or intimidation is against the law, and it is no defense. Under a state of war, under political instability, or any other public emergency, to ever coerce someone into anything. So that our government's actually committed the act of torture on all of us for not taking a vaccine that they threatened to do. And so they're breaking the law themselves to fit a narrative which we know is wealth transfer with the COVID. And so this good for all is a disgusting agenda.
It's one of the harder ones to read, like just the description that is, because it's almost in every word that you read in the forming of these sentences is complete gaslighting. Everything they're saying here, like Mark said at the beginning of this, is being free of fear from all forms of violence and feel safe, and these feel free from fear and feel safe. They literally did the exact opposite of that and are still doing that. They're still doing it. And I have more to say later, of course, on some of the firearm stuff and armed violence and issues like that. But I'll let you guys keep going.
I totally agree. Like when we look at accountability, and just recently, Chrystia Freeland with a $200 million invested into companies that don't exist.
Right.
This is at the height of when we're talking about this, and they're projecting this image of they're doing no wrong. And we need to only look at Catherine McKenna as well as like, where is the money? And the fine or the fee for her is, well, I'll do better next time. There was no fine. There was no judicial processes taking place. She stepped down, and that's the end of the story. And millions are gone. And then to your point about demonstrably demonstrating this, where they have the right to take away our freedoms. Brian Peckford, the Honorable Brian Peckford, who helped write the charter, is in court with the government because what he projected and what he wrote, the government is questioning him on what his thought process is. This is the guy who helped write it. And this points to the gaslighting, is that they don't care. And the police state is what they want to create. Because how can everybody feel safe? Like, are you going to have a police officer at every driveway, every hotel, everywhere? I don't even want the answer to that, but I suspect the answer they're going to give is yes. That's what they want to do.
You talk about a police state, and that's what we're moving towards with surveillance and tracking and tracing and all of this. I mean, there is nothing anyone will be able to do without the government knowing about it. Nothing. You can't purchase anything without the government knowing in a digital currency world, in a digital ID world, where everything you do is tracked and traced, and you're surveilled with cameras at every corner. There's nothing the government won't know you're doing. And I mean, people refer to this as 1984. It is. That's exactly where we're headed. And people better damn well wake up very soon to all of this, because the next thing you'll know, you'll turn around and it'll all be in place.
Well, they're working very hard to implement a lot of these things. We see this where they want digital ID, digital currency for 15-year-olds, but they're also wanting every child that is born to be registered the day of into a digital system. This isn't just like going to Vital Statistics and say, I want to copy my birth certificate for the child I had 2 years ago. No, it needs to be right there and then. And that, again, creates that digital flow that there is no margin for error.
The city of Edmonton just announced 15-minute communities, right?
Just like,
and that's in Alberta.
and for those that are listening, we covered this in an SDG prior, and for anybody who was listening to that and thought maybe we were still conspiracy theorists, think no longer and just look it up, because it was announced. Today is January 18th, and Yeah, and of 2023, and that definitely was announced.
And so it's important that, again, we run into this crossover from one goal to the other, and they're all connected, right? Like this, when I look at this agenda, I see it as one massive document that's going to control all aspects of everybody's life. That's exactly what it is. So I'm sort of a big picture guy, but we look at it, we're going in through this process, through this project, one by one. But we can see where so many of these are tied to one another. And I mean, strong institutions, that's your that's your banking, that's your courts, that's your policing, that's your judges, that's your government, your bureaucracy, strong institutions. Well, I don't know. I thought our institutions were already pretty strong back in the day when we respected freedom and we respected liberty and we respected justice and all of these things that we cherish. Everything they're doing goes against the values of Western civilization. Again, the values of freedom, liberty, sovereignty, justice, equality under the law, prosperity, and truth. All of that is under attack because they need to destroy those values to implement the goals of sustainable development. They can't do it without destroying those values. Those are the values that are under attack, and they'll destroy them to implement this agenda. And that's why they need strong institutions, and they don't want peace. They know. Klaus Schwab said it himself out of the World Economic Forum that he expects the world to become a much more angrier place because they know what they're going to try to do to people. They know how much control they're going to put on people. And there's going to be people that rebel. I mean, all you have to do is look around right now in the world. How many countries are going up in flames because they're corrupt? I mean, you look at even the elections in America, in Brazil, in other countries. This is corruption. This is fraud on a massive scale in countries they need to fall. And we're witnessing it. We're watching it happen. We're watching people get angry. We're watching revolts. We're watching rebellions bubbling up. Klaus Schwab said himself, not 6 months ago, that the world is going to become a much angrier place because he knows everything they want to implement is going to piss people off. And it's going to happen here too. And if people don't figure this out, the path that they have us on is very dark. It's a terrible dark path if we don't put a stop to this within the next year or two.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that dark path and that corruption and go back to what Dave had talked about a little bit earlier. So that request was for $2 billion. We're not talking millions, folks. We are talking $2 billion. And she was questioned by Senator Elizabeth Marshall. And she stated this: it's going to provide $2 billion to you as minister to buy shares in a corporation which does not exist. I think it's really important for people that might be hearing this for the first time that weren't paying attention, that there's no legislation which tells us anything about this yet to be created corporation. So where was this money going to go? Well, it was going to go to the Canada Growth Fund. Well, what's the Canada Growth Fund? Well, if you look up the Canada Growth Fund and on the Department of Finance Canada website, this is what this is about. So in Budget 2022 announced the government's intention to create the Canada Growth Fund to be capitalized with $15 billion and committed to provide details about its launch in the fall economic update. So what's the rationale here? CGF, or Canada Growth Fund, will help Canada keep pace with a growing list of jurisdictions. And here's the really important part for people to pay attention to. that are using innovative public funding tools to attract the significant private capital required to accelerate the deployment of technologies required to decarbonize and grow their economies. So really important for people to understand that.
Carbon credits, right? That's what they're talking about. Carbon credits for everything you do, right down to the piece of beef that you buy. A pound of beef in the store has a certain amount of carbon, and that's what it is. I mean, they're pointing to it. You just read it, so people need to believe it. This is off government websites.
Well, the other thing that people need to take a closer look at, because we've been talking about the promotion of law, and they lay it out in Target 16.3. But what really strikes me as interesting is 16.3.2. Unsentenced detainees as a proportion of overall prison population. But can you imagine that? Unsentenced detainees as a proportion of the overall prison population. This means innocent people who are maybe scheduled for a court date or are awaiting something, or maybe have been falsely accused, falsely arrested, they will be part of the overall prison population. Prison is, I've never been there and I never intend to be there, but it doesn't strike me as a community of friendly people where regular street people like myself, everyday citizens, are going to feel comfortable and feel safe in. And again, they're laying this out for us to read and see. It's on their website. They're posting this. And I don't understand why people aren't raising a greater alarm, because
they don't know about it.
Well, this is very concerning to me.
Because nobody has ever openly discussed this publicly to anybody, ever. We're it. Right?
It really is truly unbelievable.
Like, imagine, and I want people to really grasp this, and I want them to get angry, because think about this. Since the inception of this agenda, the 17 goals, the 169 targets, the 239 indicators that they want to achieve on the backs of Canadian taxpayers, on the backs of Canadians, hardworking Canadians. Never has an elected politician ever presented this agenda to the people to explain to them what some of the consequences to this agenda will be, and even what their plan is and how they plan on implementing this enormously consequential and detrimental agenda in our nation. Never has it happened federally, provincially, municipally, and they're all on board. And none of them have said a word to any of their constituents. Never, not once.
You know, I just talked to somebody about this the other day, and you know, he seems to be a wise, intelligent man, and claims to be awake to all of this. And I was talking to him about the SDGs, and you know, his response to it was simply that you know, it'll never happen, it'll never unfold. But it has been happening, and it is unfolding as we speak. And so this is why I think this is so important for people to really listen to and really dig into, and also go out after they're hearing this and look for more evidence to what we're talking about here. We really need people to be looking into these things for themselves as well, and looking for you know, evidence of everything we're talking about here, because it is there, it's everywhere, it's all around us, it's happening.
And so, not to mention that no politician has ever taken it to the people to inform them of this agenda that they've all committed to. But while they were implementing it through the bureaucracy, they covered it off by calling it a conspiracy theory, by calling people like myself, who identified this agenda, Agenda 21 back in the day, and Agenda 2030 since 2015. We've to this day, we've been labeled, shamed, ridiculed as conspiracy theorists while they implement it.
Mark, Gentlemen, 16.5 states substantially reduce corruption and bribery in all their forms.
They just increase the corruption and bribery.
That's all they've been doing.
Yep.
Well, and I think that speaks to 16.1 a little bit, where their goal is to reduce violence, and they've done quite the opposite. In fact, when we look at the money that they're putting towards this proposed gun buyback program versus what to crack down on illegal guns coming into Canada, they are putting many fold times the money to buy these guns back. And the part that bothers me is, in order to do a transaction where you have a buyer and a seller, both parties have to agree. And the government is not giving us an option as legal gun owners. And if we have a center fire gun that falls in their new category of like thousands of guns that are banned in Canada, they will offer us so and so many dollars for it and take it off our hands. It's like, well, that gun doesn't need to leave my premises because I'm not selling it. It's not up for sale. And yesterday it was legal, today it's not, and they use the word assault style. Well,
Yeah.
that word, it's mind numbing that because we have airsoft guns that are also targeted under the assault style. Like, are you kidding me? This is a gun that shoots plastic pellets at you, and it has a dab of paint in it.
So it's a lot like what Dennis Meadows says in that video I have pinned to my Twitter, and it's pinned to a number of my Facebook pages as well, where he says that yes, they want to eliminate or reduce the Earth's population from 7 billion down to 1 billion. So they're going to eradicate 6 billion people, but they want to do it in a peaceful way, right? They want to do it in a way that we can all share the experience, and in a way that isn't violent. So in other words, in a way that the state can control the masses, and that they can go on with their agenda, and over time eradicate 6 billion people from the planet. And so we don't get angry, right? And so we don't defend ourselves, and we don't create violence. That's what this is all about.
Sure. And the law that they're going to implement to fulfill what you were talking about is 16.9, provide legal identity for all, including birth registration. I'd like them to actually define that, because it sounds like, well, we all have identity and we all have birth certificates, but I beg to see that what that actually means is basically digital ID and basically birthing permits. You're not going to be allowed to have children unless you have a permit to do so. And that's, calling it right out.
And so what happens when a couple manage to get themselves pregnant? What happens then? Does the state come in and zap that baby? Is that what's going to happen? Because they broke the rules. They know, the state knows everything they're doing, including what their body is doing, right? Through nanoparticles and nanotechnology. They're going to know, and Harari said this himself, that they need to know what's happening not only on the outside of people's bodies, but on the inside of their bodies. And we're going to be connected, and they're going to be able to, the health services are going to be able to know exactly what your health is doing, and if you're pregnant or not. And so then what? The state comes in and says, yeah, you know what? You don't have a permit to have a baby, so we're going to take you to the hospital. We're going to abort that baby.
Well, haven't they done something like this in China already, where their families were only allowed to have one child? I don't know what they did if you accidentally had two, or if there was some kind of birth control implemented. I don't know what happened in China, but we should probably find that out.
Well, in China, birth control, the average woman will have 3 to 4 abortions a year because there is no birth control other than abortion.
And this is your strong institutions. China is the model. They've told us China is the model for social credit and digital ID and digital currency and all of this stuff. All these control mechanisms, surveillance. China's the model. And this is what we're all moving towards.
This whole SDG here is language that we don't know the definitions to, and they've been playing, word salad with us for a long, long time, using the same words that we think we understand, but they actually mean the exact opposite. So we got to get back to asking them to define what this means exactly.
I want to take you guys on a thought experiment. So just imagine for a second a politician in your riding, whatever riding it is, and this is for everybody that's listening. Just imagine your federal politician, your conservative MP, your liberal MP, your NDP MP, whoever it is, your Green MP, your Bloc MP, doesn't matter. Imagine sitting at a town hall meeting and them actually telling you what this agenda means, telling you how many targets there are, how many indicators there are, and all of these mechanisms they're going to implement and put in place. What's going to happen at that town hall meeting? What's going to happen when the people are actually told this is what we want to do, and somebody actually tries to sell it to them? They're going to reject it out of hand and probably demand that politician resign immediately. That's why they haven't done this. That's why they haven't sold it. That's why they haven't told anybody about it. That's why they frame it as a conspiracy theory, because none of them have the courage to tell the people what this means.
Can we come back to the firearm stuff? Because this is a really hot topic, obviously, in Canada right now. And dare I say that people are up in arms about it. I'd like to have a little pun in there too. I think we should talk about where we were at before 2016 or 2015 when Justin Trudeau was elected. I'm going to ask you guys a question. I want the audience to think about this for a second as well. What do you think the percentage of violent crimes that were committed with firearms was leading up to his election?
Legal firearms or illegal firearms?
Firearms, period.
I think it's important to make the distinction between legal and illegal. Most crimes committed with firearms are with illegal firearms, are with firearms that they shouldn't own, that the criminals shouldn't own, but they do anyway, that aren't registered.
I definitely agree with you, but the Government of Canada website would say otherwise, and they just have it under the umbrella of firearms. So there you go. So it's 2%. 2%. This past summer, I was on hold when I was calling a business, and the music was interrupted. It was a government-sponsored ad telling the people on hold that they knew that the Government of Canada knows how fearful they are about gun violence in Canada. So, we had programming of that all over the place. And for the record, back in just leading up to his election, these related crimes were representing a rate of 21 victims per 100,000 population, which was down from 29 in 2009. And currently, I believe, if the website of the Government of Canada is accurate, that it's back up from the 21 to the 29. So still in that 2 to 3% range. And this is what they wanted. This is why they want to take our firearms away.
Well, so yeah, they know what's coming. They know how angry we're going to be. And the last thing they want is for an angry population that's armed. And so they're about to do things that are going to inspire us to do things that we're forced to do. I mean, they're even moving towards a pilot project in Prince Edward Island. I don't know if you guys saw this or not. And PEI is going to be, the unveiling of this program, confiscation, where RCMP are going to go door to door in Prince Edward Island, and they're going to collect guns that they think people have. And I mean, all of this, if we understand it, and if anybody Googles, again, firearms and SDGs, you'll see what pops up. It's all connected to the SDGs. In order for them to achieve the SDGs, they need to confiscate all weapons, especially quote unquote assault style weapons, because obviously those are more effective in dealing with, a rebellion or a revolution of some certain degree that they're pushing us towards. This isn't the people sitting back and planning an armed rebellion. This is the consequence to what they want to achieve. And they understand that and they know it's coming. So this is all to do, and again, it all comes from UNODA, which is an organization at the UN that talks about taking civilian weapons out of the hands of civilians and ensuring that we're stuck with single fire rather than semi-auto, and ultimately they understand they're up against an enormous number of people with semi-auto. So we need to get rid of them. We need to confiscate them. It's all related. Just anyone has to look. You just go to the UN, go to Google and search firearms SDGs, uh, small arms treaty SDGs. It's all there. It's all written out in plain English for you. That's what this is all about.
It really is. And as we've been, for our listeners that are old enough to remember, in Canada here, we had the FAC, which was your firearm safety certificate, and that's all we needed. Yeah, I mean, that's all we needed. So basically, they went to, PAL, possession acquisition. So when they did that, they tried to, what they actually succeeded in doing is removing the possession of it being an actual piece of property, because our guns actually, I still believe, that are a piece of property. As Dave was talking about earlier, we bought that money with, weapon with money, made the legal trade, and now it's a possession. It is not actually some kind of privilege or anything like that. It's no different than your TV or anything else. It's a possession. So we have some laws to circumvent here and still protect us, I believe, at this point. And
if you look at the Bill of Rights, Canadian Bill of Rights, Saskatchewan Bill of Rights, in there it talks about property and property rights. And so that's what people will want to use, I guess, if the state does come after us, our property.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kelsey, I mean, this will probably be flashing in the background. So just read it. Basically, the SDG on the guns. It's right there.
Just to be clear, are you talking about the document in the background here?
Yeah. That's it. There's seven lines to read, and it says it all.
In the discussion framework, we have identified several problem areas that must be addressed. They are: 1, classification of military-grade weapons to be made illegal for possession. 2, creation of program.
Military grade. What does that mean? What does that mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I mean, what does that mean? That can mean anything.
2, creation of programs to provide reasonable compensation for voluntary surrender of said arms. 3, codification of laws to begin the restricting and strict licensing of concealable firearms. 4, codification of laws to begin the restricting and strict licensing of hunting grade firearms. 5, codification of laws to restrict the sale of and possession of ammunition and components to manufacture ammunition. 6, finally, codification of laws to completely make any and all firearms illegal to own, possess, or use outside of military and law enforcement usage. And 7, creation of a United Nations Police Task Force with the specific mission of assisting member nations with the collection of weaponry from civilian hands.
So isn't that interesting? We already have a United Nations task force that's going to come into countries and just remove our weapons, not our own police. This isn't for our safety. This is United Nations coming onto our land and going to take our weapons. Isn't that interesting? It's written right there. People need to believe it. The proof is right in front of you.
And it's interesting to note the date on this. This is dating back to July of 2013. So they've been at this for a long, long time already.
Oh, yeah.
They've been instituting and normalizing and conditioning and recruiting people, I would dare say, on their end to believe that this is admirable and this is justified and this is what law enforcement does. I'm grateful that we have a few prime ministers or premiers in our provinces that have said we will not be using national or local resources to do this. But as Richard pointed out, if somebody from outside comes in and does it for you, it doesn't matter what the local.
Well, and that's just it. I don't necessarily hold a lot of value in what they're saying, because the impetus is there. This is what they want. They're going to come in and they're going to do it one way or the other. And I'm not hearing very strong language. I mean, Scott Moe, for example, in Saskatchewan, he will not talk about sustainable development agenda. He won't utter the words. He won't acknowledge it, recognize it, denounce it. He can't, because his Conservative Party federally is 100% committed to it. And so all of these premiers carry water for the federal Conservatives. And so they can talk a good game, but I want to hear them acknowledge it, recognize it, and fully denounce it before I'll believe anything that comes out of their mouth. Actions speak much louder than words.
That's a wrap, folks. We would like to thank you so much for joining us in this journey. If you found this episode valuable, please share it with others on your social media platforms. Thanks again for listening.